My name is Madison Clark. That day, I was sitting in the middle of a conference room on the 47th floor, across from directors representing 3 different countries, with an international deal worth $300 million behind me, one I had spent the past 8 months carefully building. Then, with a single vibration from my phone, everything vanished. An email just 5 words long: effective now, you are suspended. No explanation. No meeting. Signed, Jared Stone, the chairman's son, just appointed acting CEO less than 24 hours earlier. I was thrown out of the game like a discarded chess piece. But what he didn't know was that firing me would be the biggest mistake of his life. Have you ever been cast aside because someone thought you no longer mattered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear the truth I'm about to uncover, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. I left that conference room with what must have looked like steady footsteps, but inside me was nothing but a stunned emptiness. Riding the elevator down to the parking garage, I couldn't even recall how I drove home. My whole body moved on autopilot, while my mind floated somewhere between memory and the present, haunted by one unshakable question. Why me? For the past 12 years, I gave everything to that company. When I first walked through its doors, no one even remembered my name. I was a contract assistant, quiet, working late into the night just to make last-minute edits for departments I didn't even belong to. I had no connections in finance. No relatives in management. All I had was determination and a stubborn refusal to quit. In those early months, I often stayed late. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew the most important details were usually missed at the end of the day when everyone else was exhausted. It was during one of those late evenings that Harold Stone walked into my office unannounced. "Are you the one who revised the Southwest contract today?" he asked, holding a folder I had almost entirely rewritten, down to the legal structure. I didn't know how to respond. A question like that in an environment like ours could either be a compliment or a warning. I simply nodded. He didn't say another word. Just looked at me for a moment, then quietly walked away. A week later, I was transferred to the contract negotiation division, a role that typically took at least 3 years to even be considered for. People started to notice. There were whispers, speculations, suspicious glances. But I had nothing to hide. I worked day and night, studied international contract law on my own time, and showed up to every meeting, mandatory or not. 3 years later, when the company faced a serious financial scandal involving a deal with the Eureka Group in Hong Kong, I was the only one willing to step up and renegotiate to contain the damage. I remember that day vividly. The leadership team was in disarray, panic everywhere, and Harold stood at the head of the table, listening in silence as voices clashed around him. "That's enough," he said, calm but firm. "Let Madison try." No one objected. No one supported it either. They just looked at me like they were about to watch a train wreck unfold. I went to Hong Kong alone. 5 days. 6 meetings. Rejected flat out twice. On the 7th day, I finally convinced them to salvage the contract, under the condition that we take an 18% cut in projected profit. But that saved the company from a lawsuit worth tens of millions. After that, I was no longer just a contract assistant. I became the company's crisis handler. I was offered the role of VP of Strategic Operations more than once, but I always declined. I had been married once. That man didn't cheat on me, he just couldn't understand why I would choose a life this demanding. When we divorced, I made myself a promise. No matter how far my career went, I wouldn't let it consume what was left of me. I needed to keep something for myself, even if it was just evenings without email or Sunday mornings without surprise meetings. Harold never asked why I kept turning down promotions. But he always let me work my way. He didn't interfere and he didn't shower me with praise. He simply gave me trust. Jared was the complete opposite. The first time I met Jared was during a Christmas gathering, when Harold invited the board and their families to his estate in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Jared had just returned from 2 years in Europe, claiming he was working on a startup, though in reality he was fleeing a messy incident in Spain, a cryptocurrency investment scandal that had been reported anonymously in the press. He entered the party like a movie star. White blazer, silver watch, smug grin, and a glance that made people feel dismissed without even knowing why. I stood in a corner, observing. He didn't recognize me. Didn't even ask who I was. In the years that followed, Jared would occasionally appear at board meetings, either as a temporary advisor or a strategic observer. No one really knew his role and no one dared to ask. Everyone knew he was Harold's son with his second wife, a former model now living quietly in California. There were rumors around the company. Jared had once been detained in Berlin for using a false identity in a financial transaction. It was hushed up, never made the press, but Harold had to spend a considerable sum to erase the trail. I didn't care about Jared's past. What I couldn't believe was that someone who had never led a department, never held a client portfolio, could possibly understand what pressure actually meant. And now, not even 24 hours after Harold was hospitalized for a minor stroke, Jared stepped in as acting CEO, and the very first thing he did was suspend me. No questions. No internal meeting. No prior warning. I'm still trying to figure out, why me? Was he trying to prove something? Or was he hiding something much bigger that I accidentally stood in the way of? I sat in my small apartment, watching the lights of Chicago slowly flicker on outside my window. One thought kept turning over in my mind. If Jared wasn't just trying to remove me from the company, then what exactly was he trying to erase? I got a call from HR on Tuesday morning at exactly 8:13 a.m. The voice on the other end was polite, almost awkwardly formal. She simply said that Jared Stone, the new acting CEO, wanted to see me within the next 15 minutes. No reason given. No subject line for the meeting. Just a brief internal discussion. I was on the 24th floor when the call came, finalizing the last few slides for a presentation to a Japanese partner scheduled for the next day. The file was still open on my screen as I stood up, closed the laptop gently, and walked out without saying a word. Something about the HR assistant's tone told me this wasn't about a project update or policy change. The elevator ride to the executive floor had never felt longer. Each ding, each passing floor, sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't afraid of being fired. I was afraid of the kind of power games I once thought I was wise enough to avoid. Jared was already seated in the meeting room when I entered. No assistant. No HR representative. Just the two of us, a large empty room and a thin folder on the table. He didn't stand up. Didn't greet me. Just looked up and said calmly, "We've decided to temporarily suspend you from your current position, effective immediately." I stood still, eyes locked on his, not blinking. Not because I was shocked, but because I was waiting for him to explain. A reason, a rationale, any indication that this decision was based on facts and not whim. But Jared just sat there, arms crossed, leaning back in the leather chair with a faint smile. "We're restructuring," he added, voice steady like he was reading off a quarterly report. "Clearing out bottlenecks, outdated routines. Pushing the company forward." "And what am I in your eyes?" "An outdated routine?" I asked, not loudly but clearly. He didn't answer. Just flipped through the folder like he was scanning a shopping list. Then signed the front page. "All your system access will be disabled by noon today," he said. "You can gather your personal items within the hour." "Was anyone else involved in this decision?" I asked, keeping my tone as even as I could. "This falls under the authority of the acting CEO," he replied without hesitation. "And I've consulted with a few relevant parties. We believe this is a necessary step." I nodded. Said nothing. I didn't want him to see that I was hurt. Even less did I want to give him the satisfaction of thinking he'd won. I stood up, slowly turned, and walked toward the door. But just as my hand touched the knob, Jared spoke. "You know, I've always wondered why my father trusted you so much. Maybe he needed someone like you at the time. But this era, Madison, belongs to those who dare to change." I didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me, and it wasn't until the elevator began sliding downward that I let my back lean against the wall. Back on the 24th floor, my office felt like a vacuum. A few heads turned when I returned, surprise written plainly across their faces, but no one said a word. Maybe they'd heard something. Maybe they were guessing. I opened the drawer and took out the small box I'd kept ready for years, just in case I ever had to leave without notice. Anyone who's been in this world long enough knows. Nothing is permanent. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. But deep in my chest, a tightness pressed against my ribs. Not because of the title I lost, but because something felt deeply wrong. Jared knew nothing about the Phoenix Tech deal. He hadn't joined a single meeting with the partners. Never read the documents. Never initialed a single memo. I was the only person who had coordinated, negotiated, and held the legal authority from beginning to end. I paused, staring at the blank screen. Before leaving, I checked one last time. The meeting invite for the Phoenix Tech integration demo had been sent, scheduled for 10 a.m. on Thursday. No one but me had access to the presentation account. I closed my laptop, tucked it into my bag, and walked out of that office no longer an employee of the company. But I knew one thing. Jared had just moved a chess piece without knowing the rules. And he would pay for that, not with an apology, but with exactly what he thought he controlled. That evening, I sat alone in my small kitchen, soft yellow light casting shadows across the aging cream-colored walls. The wine glass on the table was only half empty, and the laptop had been open for nearly an hour, but I hadn't typed a single word. My mind was trapped somewhere between memory and a strange kind of awareness, like walking into a familiar room and realizing something had been rearranged, yet you couldn't name what. I reopened the folder containing the entire Phoenix Tech file. This deal was the result of 8 relentless months of work, over 30 meetings, 5 rounds of negotiations, and hundreds of emails exchanged in 3 languages. Phoenix Tech was one of the largest partners our company had ever approached in Asia. They required every legal process to be clear, transparent, and above all, strictly compliant with international financial law. I scrolled to the PDF labeled Power of Authority, Madison Clark. The document had been signed back in March by Harold Stone himself, after Phoenix Tech specifically requested that a single representative be named with full decision-making authority over the contract. I read through every line, not to check for errors, but to confirm what I had always known. Without my signature and presence, any negotiation attempt would be deemed invalid. Phoenix Tech had previously terminated a deal simply because the wrong person showed up to the final meeting. I placed my hand on the table. My palm was ice cold. Jared clearly had no idea. He hadn't been to a single session. Even the final presentation deck was encrypted and accessible only through my personal passcode. If he planned to continue the deal without me, he was making a catastrophic mistake. But what chilled me more was another possibility. What if he did know, and was doing it anyway? I opened my personal email. No messages from internal contacts, but one caught my eye in the spam folder. The sender's name was vague, Phoenix Internal. The message was short. Still on for Thursday's meeting, Madison? We need to reconfirm the primary contact. I replied immediately, yes, the schedule remains unchanged. I'll follow up from the official address within 24 hours. No name. No explanation. Just enough to keep them from walking away for now. But time was running out. I called Laura, my former assistant who had left the company 3 months earlier due to family reasons. We weren't close, but she had helped build the internal Phoenix Tech filing system, and I trusted she might still have a backup in case the main files were ever deleted. Madison? It's late. What's going on? Her voice was groggy but concerned. I need to confirm something. Do you still have a copy of Appendix 3B from the Phoenix Tech contract? The original I sent through the private drive. Wait, what happened? She paused, then whispered. I heard the news. I was shocked. Everyone said no one could replace you on that deal. I wasn't fired, Laura. I cut in calmly. I was suspended. And if Jared tries to substitute me at the signing, the whole company could be in serious trouble. She went silent. Then replied firmer this time, I still have it. I'll send it now. Less than a minute later, the file came through. Every line of it was a double-edged sword. Appendix 3B didn't just confirm I was the sole authorized representative. It explicitly stated that any change in the negotiator without written notice at least 5 days in advance would render the contract null and void. The company would be liable for a breach penalty, $18 million. I leaned back in my chair as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. This wasn't personal anymore. This was a ticking bomb. I pictured Jared walking into the Phoenix Tech boardroom on Thursday morning, smiling confidently, not realizing that all it would take was one question from across the table. Where's Madison? And his entire scheme would collapse. I closed my eyes. I could stay silent. Let him destroy himself. I could pretend I knew nothing, wait for the quarterly report to crash and shareholders to erupt. But if Phoenix Tech felt deceived, they wouldn't just pull out. They'd go public. And the company, The decent people still working hard every day would suffer the fallout. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used outside of business hours in over 10 years. Harold Stone. The phone rang 3 times before a raspy, deliberate voice answered. Hello. I drew a deep breath and said, It's me. Madison. Hello. Harold's voice came through, weak but still clear, every word spoken like it was pushing past a tide of restrained fury. I could hear the soft beeps of medical monitors in the background. It's me, Madison, I repeated, steadying my voice though my heart was pounding in my chest. Good Lord. Where are you? Why did you disappear? Jared said you resigned. I closed my eyes, paused a few seconds before telling the truth. You should ask your son. I didn't resign. I was suspended. There was silence on the other end. So long I thought the line had dropped. Then, after a slow, deep breath that sounded like he was trying to contain his anger, he said carefully, What did you just say? Jared called me into a meeting this morning. No HR present. No clear reason. He just said, the company needs restructuring. Then he signed the suspension order, effective immediately. I never, he murmured, voice breaking slightly. I've only been in the hospital for less than 2 days. I heard the rustle of movement, metal clanging against the side of the hospital bed, followed by a strained exhale. You shouldn't strain yourself, I said quickly. I'm calling just to confirm one thing. My authorization with Phoenix Tech is still valid, right? No one else can replace me under the terms of the contract. Yes. Absolutely yes. It's all laid out in Appendix 3B. You're the only person Phoenix Tech recognizes. Why? Is something happening with the deal? Looks like Jared is planning to lead the meeting with them on Thursday, I replied. Without me. Silence fell again. But not from surprise, he was beginning to understand the seriousness. When he spoke again, his voice was much lower, almost a whisper. He knows he's not allowed. So why would he? I didn't say another word. I knew he was working through the connections on his own. And more than anyone, he understood. This was no longer a temporary trial. This was intentional. Madison, he said again, his tone steadier now, though he coughed lightly mid-sentence. I need you to keep all related files intact. Don't delete anything. I'll have someone call you within the hour. Someone I trust. I'll wait, I answered briefly. We hung up without saying goodbye. I stayed still, not feeling even the slightest relief. Because just 10 minutes later, another call came in from an unfamiliar number not saved in my contacts. And along with it came a chill down my spine. I lightly tapped the record button before answering. Madison Clark? A deep male voice, smooth and professional, like someone who had spent years practicing corporate law. I'm listening, I answered shortly. This is Stephen Langley, special advisor to the acting CEO. I'm calling in good faith and hope you'll approach this conversation with the level of clarity it deserves. I'm listening. Get to the point. Excellent, he said, completely unfazed. We understand that you've made significant contributions to the company. And we also understand that your suspension may have caused some confusion. But this can all be resolved smoothly, provided you agree not to interfere with the Phoenix Tech deal this week. And what exactly do I get from this smooth resolution? I asked, eyes fixed on the blinking recording icon. A dignified exit agreement, a fair severance package, and a glowing letter of recommendation to take wherever you wish. I remained silent. Langley continued, his voice light like reading off a legal clause. You could call it a polite separation. No legal mess. No reputational damage. We're simply trying to avoid disruption, for everyone's stability. Has anyone else been offered such a polite separation? I asked, my hand still resting on the record button. Good question. But not relevant. And if I say no? He chuckled softly as if already prepared for the question. I believe you're smart enough not to make this personal. In our world, whoever controls the story, controls the outcome. I said nothing. Just tapped my nails softly on the table in rhythm with my pulse. You'll consider it, won't you? He pressed again. I'll think about it, I replied, then hung up without waiting for his goodbye. Immediately after, I forwarded the recording to my encrypted email archive, the one I had set up during the Eureka crisis 3 years earlier. I attached all critical files, including the scan of Appendix 3B and internal notes documenting every step of the Phoenix Tech negotiations. I no longer felt hurt or angry. Only one thing was clear in my mind. What Jared was trying to hide wasn't just personal error. It was something much larger. And I was standing right at its edge. The next morning I wore a pale gray suit. My hair was pulled back in a clean bun, my face lightly made up, but every feature sharpened by a quiet resolve that only comes from those who've seen the edge of trust and walked back. I passed through the company's main lobby without stopping at reception, didn't scan my employee badge as usual. The security guard at the door, someone who'd known me for years, paused for a second, then nodded silently and held the door. They'd heard something. And they knew I wasn't returning as an employee. I went straight up to the 31st floor, the top level where only a few strategic meeting rooms and VIP lounges existed, and one small isolated room at the far end of the hall. No name. No number. Harold had built it as a bunkered room, for sensitive materials storage, accessible only through dual biometric clearance, fingerprint scan and two-factor authorization. I was one of only 2 people granted access. No one stopped me. No one else was on the floor this early in the week. The sliding door opened, and the scent of fresh paper and untouched electronics greeted me with a sterile familiarity. Inside was a single large table, 2 screens hardwired into the local server, and a standalone data storage system completely cut off from the company's main network. I powered on the system, entered the code, scanned my fingerprint. The light turned green. Everything booted up smoothly as if no one had touched it in months. I navigated the directories, each folder still labeled in the coded shorthand Harold and I had used. In the internal clearance Phoenix section, I found a folder created less than 48 hours earlier. I hadn't made it. I opened the first file. A video recording from a closed-door meeting. No listed attendees, but I immediately recognized the voice. "We don't need Madison for the signing," Jared said clearly. "I've arranged for someone to replicate the authorization. All we need is a formal sit-down. The other side won't check." Another voice chimed in, sounded like Langley, the legal advisor, "But if Phoenix Tech discovers the proxy is fake, they could sue." "We've got a third-party intermediary," Jared continued. "Everything traces through them. I've done this before. Don't act surprised." I froze. What had once been just a gut feeling was now proof. Tangible. Irrefutable. I opened the second file. A scanned draft agreement between Jared and an overseas third party, Galian Ventures. A name I'd never heard before. But in the document, one line stood out clearly: "Utilize Phoenix Tech's proprietary analysis platform, integrated into Galian's intellectual property system, with undisclosed revenue sharing terms." I zoomed in on the signature. It bore my name. Impossible to mistake. The curves matched my exact handwriting. But I had never signed any agreement involving Galian. And I had never authorized the transfer of Phoenix Tech's protected technology to any unapproved party. I checked the metadata, technical fingerprints embedded in the original file. File created by Jared Stone. Creation date: 2 days after my suspension. IP address: executive floor server, 30th floor. I sat completely still. My hands were ice cold. Jared hadn't just pushed me off the project. He was using my name to disguise an illegal tech deal, possibly involving international IP theft. And the worst part, if I hadn't caught it or if Phoenix Tech didn't notice, the legal fallout would land on me. I had no idea what Jared was thinking. Maybe he believed I'd stay quiet. Maybe he assumed I was too exhausted to fight back. But he forgot one thing: I don't stay silent in the face of betrayal. I saved all files to a private encrypted drive, triple-locked, and uploaded copies to external secure servers, the same ones I used during the Eureka investigation. I preserved login records, audio clips, even the metadata of the forged contract. Every step documented with timestamps. Right before leaving the room, I printed a copy of the forged contract, just 1 page, enough to serve as a comparison, and slipped it into my leather case. Before shutting down the system, I left one line in the internal access log. Confirmed. Falsified legal authorization documents. Violation of international intellectual property rights. Tracking code: MCL031. I stepped out of that quiet room as if walking through a hidden door onto a battlefield. And I knew, from that moment forward, there was no turning back. Not for me. And definitely not for Jared. I got home just before 5 p.m. The city outside moved along as if nothing had happened, but inside me, everything was shifting in another direction. Silent, cold, and precise. I sat at my desk and opened the backup data stored in the encrypted drive. It wasn't just the forged contract. Not just the recording of Jared's voice. It was a full pattern of deliberate behavior. From abruptly suspending me to manipulating legal authority, to using my name to transfer technology to a foreign entity. This wasn't a mistake. It was a scheme. I began drafting an internal report. I didn't include my name. No personal identifiers. Just the facts. The links to encrypted files were set as temporary, valid for 24 hours only. Each piece of evidence came with a tracking code, timestamp, and metadata for verification. I sent the email to all department heads with a simple subject line: request for internal investigation regarding unauthorized access to proprietary technology. No signature. No explanation. Just the attached files. I didn't expect immediate replies. In the world I'd been part of for over a decade, silence was a survival strategy. Everyone knew, speaking up too soon could make you the next target. But I knew how to plant seeds in the right places. And I knew exactly who would read it first. The next morning at 6:32 a.m., the temporary inbox received its first response. An internal address, ultanaka@koritaclab.com. I recognized it instantly. Leon Tanaka, lead systems engineer in the tech division. One of the few who had once openly challenged Jared in a meeting earlier that year. The email contained just one sentence: I confirm the data is authentic. I sat up straighter. 12 minutes later, another email came from the cybersecurity team. Then from internal audit. By 10 a.m., 8 people had responded, all confirming the documents were valid and revealed serious violations of intellectual property protection protocols. By 11, the senior engineering team, 6 people who had worked directly on the Phoenix Tech project, sent a formal petition to the company's board. They called for an immediate suspension of all negotiations with third parties and requested the formation of an independent investigative committee. The petition included 34 potential breaches and highlighted the risk of the company being sued if it failed to take action. I sat in my apartment watching the information ripple across the screen like a domino effect. No one knew who started it. But now the entire system was no longer silent. By 3 p.m. I received an anonymous call. No number displayed. I answered. Madison, came a whispering, urgent voice. It's Rick from System Security. What's happening? I asked, fingers already hovering over the keyboard. Jared just ordered the entire IT team to scan and remove sensitive files from the servers on the 30th floor. He says it's for routine maintenance, but it's clearly an attempt to wipe records. We've been split into teams, no one's allowed to ask questions. But I saw him access the internal coordination system using Langley's credentials. Do you have the log? I asked. I took a screenshot. Should I send it to your old address? Send it now. And Rick. Yeah. Stay away from the executive wing for the next few days. Follow procedures but don't let anyone know you're helping me. Got it, he whispered and hung up. That same evening, I sent a second report directly to the encrypted inbox of the independent legal oversight team. In the email, I included evidence that Jared had used my identity, falsified authorization documents, and was involved in leaking contract information to a foreign party. I didn't need to add commentary. The files spoke for themselves. Less than 3 hours later, an emergency meeting was convened by the oversight team, without Jared present. During the session, engineers presented detailed findings on irregular system access, file alterations, signs of document forgery, and compromised encryption protocols. No names were mentioned, but every arrow pointed directly toward the executive office. Jared panicked. I heard from a contact that the next morning he personally pulled 3 IT staff into his office, ordered a full system scan, demanded all unidentified access be blocked, and insisted that all unauthorized backups be wiped. But it was already too late. The data I had sent was encrypted, backed up to 3 external servers. one of them part of a secure archive Harold had commissioned back during the 2016 crisis. And I knew for certain, Jared couldn't reach it. That day the company no longer felt quiet. In the hallways, whispers replaced greetings. Department heads stopped exchanging polite smiles. Meeting room doors closed more often, and internal emails were encrypted with unusually high-level security. And I remained in my apartment waiting. Not for Jared to speak, but for the one authority that could bring everything into the open, the board of directors. That morning, the conference room on the 31st floor no longer resembled the space used for strategic briefings or quarterly reviews. The frosted glass blinds were drawn. The long polished table had been reset. Every seat was filled. Members of the board, legal representatives, and 2 external observers sent by Harold himself. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. Only the hum of ventilation and the soft sound of pages turning. I entered at exactly 8:30 a.m. Not early, not late. Dressed neatly, hair tied low, and in my hand was a silver USB, compact, no different from the thousands that had passed through this company's network. But this one held everything. No one invited me to sit. I didn't wait for permission. I pulled out a chair near the end of the table, sat down, and placed the USB in the center like a silent challenge. A voice spoke from the head of the table. Clark, this is a high-level internal review meeting. Are you sure you want to attend as an individual without legal counsel? I'm not here to defend myself, I replied, eyes fixed on the speaker, Gwen Sloan, chair of the Corporate Ethics Committee. I'm here to defend the truth. She gave a small nod, then glanced to her right. Jared sat there, buttoned-up blazer, clean-shaven face, a tight smile stretched like a hastily carved mask. Before we begin, Jared said, voice calm, I'd like to state that I'm unsure why Madison is present today. She is no longer an official employee and is currently under review for various infractions, including... I suggest you stop, Gwen interrupted, her tone rising. The board has not concluded anything about anyone. Clark remains the only legally authorized representative on the Phoenix Tech contract. Without her presence, this meeting cannot proceed under proper compliance. Jared froze, his hand tightening around the armrest. I slowly stood, plugged the USB into the central display system. On the large screen appeared 3 folders, each numbered, time-stamped, and clearly summarized. I didn't need to say much. Each one was a puzzle piece. The audio recording of my call with Langley, images of the forged authorization document, and internal server logs showing Jared had created and approved the unauthorized copies. No one spoke during the 15 minutes I presented. I kept my voice steady and clear without any unnecessary emotion. This wasn't a place to speak about pain. It was a place to bring truth into the light. When Jared's voice played saying, "She won't dare come back. I've taken care of it," I saw a few faces in the room shift slightly. An older man pushed his chair back, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Another woman kept scribbling down notes without pause. I ended with one line. Had I not uncovered this, the company could have been facing lawsuits with damages reaching tens of millions of dollars. But what's more dangerous is the silence Jared counted on to do all of it. Silence hung heavy. Then Jared jumped to his feet. This evidence, it's one-sided, he said, voice raised. Madison has had personal issues with me before. He's trying to fabricate a story. She's refused to collaborate on several projects and plays the victim. Who's to say she didn't alter the files? Before I could respond, the door to the boardroom opened. Everyone turned. Harold. He was wheeled in, visibly thinner after his time in the hospital. But his gaze hadn't lost its strength. He looked around the room, then spoke slowly, each word like a hammer on stone. I am the only person with the authority to restructure leadership in emergency circumstances. And I'm back. Jared's face turned pale. Dad, this doesn't concern. Harold raised his hand, not even looking at him. Silence. They wheeled him to the head of the table, then turned him toward Jared. I once believed you should be allowed to prove yourself. I thought a few early mistakes were understandable. But what I've heard, what I've seen this morning, this isn't a mistake. This is betrayal. Dad, she's manipulating everything. I reviewed the entire system last night. Harold cut him off, his voice calm but final. I saw the access logs. I saw the forged signatures. I saw the contract with Galian Ventures. The name you assumed I wouldn't recognize. Jared collapsed back into his chair. His face lost all color. Harold looked straight at the board. I will not defend my son. And I ask that this meeting proceed according to full protocol. I sat back down, not feeling relieved. But I no longer saw the light as something distant at the end of a tunnel. It was already here, filtering through this room in each word, each glance, and every second of silence no one dared to break. I remained still as the meeting continued after Harold's firm declaration. The board members who had until then stayed quiet began exchanging short glances and pulling out the documents they'd brought. Some leaned toward their legal advisors in hushed tones. Others flipped through pages quickly as if looking for something they'd previously missed. A vote was held within less than 30 minutes. No presentations. No defenses. No one spoke on Jared's behalf anymore. One abstention. 11 votes in agreement. Jared Stone was officially removed from his position as acting CEO, effective immediately. At the same time, the company's legal counsel announced the decision to file a personal lawsuit against him, with charges including abuse of power, document forgery, breach of financial duty, and serious damage to corporate reputation. I didn't look at Jared. But I saw his shoulders shrink, his knees tremble when Harold said he would not intervene, would not negotiate, would not protect him. If the law needs to speak, Harold said, let it speak for me. When the meeting adjourned, I began gathering my files, preparing to leave. I had done what needed to be done. There was nothing tying me to this place anymore. But as I stood, Gwen called me back with a gentle nod. Clark, please stay for a few minutes, she said. We'd like to speak with you privately. I looked at her, then at Harold, who had remained silent since the vote. His gaze wasn't as sharp now. It was deeper, wearier, but still carried weight. I nodded and sat back down. One of the board members, Mr. Blake, who had overseen the company's investment strategy for 3 terms, spoke first. We recognize the critical role you played in preventing a major crisis, he said, slow but sincere. Not just in exposing misconduct but in highlighting the weak system that allowed it to happen. We'd like to invite you to return to your previous role, Gwen continued, head of strategic relations, with full coordination authority and oversight of the entire Phoenix Tech project. I shook my head slightly. I appreciate the offer. But I didn't come back to take an old role in an old system. The room fell quiet. I looked at each person, then clarified. If you want me to return, I have 3 conditions. First, all senior personnel policies must be reviewed to eliminate family-based favoritism, regardless of who they're related to. Second, we need to establish an anonymous internal feedback system, where employees at every level can report misconduct without fear of retaliation. And third, all legal authority on strategic contracts must include cross-verification. No more letting power sit with one unsupervised individual. Gwen straightened her posture. You're proposing a full-scale restructure. Not because I want power, I said, my voice lower now, but because I don't want anyone else after me to go through what I did. Anyone who has given themselves to this company deserves a fairer system. This time Harold spoke. Then I propose we appoint Madison Clark to the role of Vice President of Strategy, a brand new position, reporting directly to the board, bypassing former executive layers. There were stunned looks around the room. Blake tilted his head slightly as if weighing the idea. Gwen pressed her lips together, then slowly nodded. I agree, she said. And let it be recorded that this marks the first time in this company's history that someone outside the founding family has been nominated to its highest executive level. I couldn't hide my emotions, not triumph, but the heavy weight of someone who now held the opportunity to change things, and understood that the responsibility wasn't just to herself anymore. I'll accept, I said, eyes drifting toward the tall windows catching the full light of midday. But I won't sit in that chair to decorate the org chart. I'll begin by dismantling the cracked walls, even the ones people would rather not see. No one objected. When I walked out of that boardroom, the hallway stretched quiet and long. No Jared. No skeptical glances. Just me, and the first steps toward something far greater than any title I had ever imagined. My new office was at the corner of the building, where morning light streamed through 3 glass walls, casting soft rays onto a charcoal gray carpet and freshly installed walnut shelves. Everything was still unfinished. A few paintings still leaned against the wall, the whiteboard was blank. But I wasn't in a rush. I sat there quietly. On the desk, a hot coffee, a blank nameplate waiting to be engraved, and my old ID badge, the one I wore through my first 7 years here until the clip broke. I never threw it out. I kept it in a drawer along with a few handwritten notes and an old fountain pen Harold once gave me. A small object, but to me, a reminder of where I began. As the computer screen lit up, an email alert sounded. A message from the internal inbox. Sender, a Jackson at operations.cortech. Not a name I recognized. Madison, my name is Angela. I'm an intern in operations. I just wanted to say thank you. For giving people like me a reason to believe fairness isn't something out of reach. That if we do what's right, someone out there will listen. I hope I get the chance to learn from you someday. I read it twice. Not because it was unclear, but because it felt familiar. I used to be that girl. The one who sent emails like that to people I thought I'd never reach. And more often than not, I never heard back. I didn't smile. I just nodded, quietly pinning my old badge back onto my blazer. Some part of me settled, like a storm had passed and left only cool droplets lingering on the glass. The phone chimed. The screen lit up with a new email from Senior HR. The subject line was simple. Candidate verification, Jared Stone. I hadn't planned to open it, but the preview text was more than enough. Candidate rejected. Reason: verified history of professional ethics violations, unresolved financial investigations, and indications of falsified legal authorization. The name of the small company in Texas wasn't mentioned, but I knew it didn't matter. It was enough to close every door. Not out of vengeance, but because consequences had finally caught up to him. I turned off the screen. Didn't save. Didn't reply. I didn't need to know where Jared would go next. My silence wasn't forgiveness, it was growth. There was a time I wanted it all to end with a trial, a press release, a headline-making exposure. But in the end I realized, not every victory needs to be loud. Sometimes, a win is simply walking into a room where you were once shut out, sitting down and being heard, not because you shouted but because you stayed true. I reopened the reorganization draft I'd been working on. One line stood out. Mentorship program for employees with fewer than 5 years experience. Launch next quarter. I planned to name it the Legacy Project. Not because I believed I'd built some great legacy, but because I wanted those who came after to know that sometimes, the most lasting changes begin in the quiet. Through resilience, through presence, through a single nod that needs no explanation. An assistant knocked on the door, then handed me a printed report from Phoenix Tech. They've confirmed a 3-year extension of the partnership, she said, and requested the current team and procedures remain in place. They also sent congratulations to the original lead negotiator. I signed the final page without hesitation. Not because I needed recognition, but because I understood what was being preserved. Trust. And to me, in the end, that's the most valuable thing anyone can build inside an organization. I took off my glasses and leaned back, eyes drifting toward the Chicago skyline glowing in the east. No one told me today was a milestone. But I felt it, in the stillness, in the steady breath, in the knowledge that I no longer had to fight to be seen. Now I chose to be seen, through my quiet strength. I know everyone listening to this might have very different thoughts. Some may think I was too harsh. Others may feel I was too soft. But what I really want to ask is, if it were you, what would you do if you were pushed out of the very place you built with your heart and patience? Would you walk away in silence, or would you come back? Not for revenge, but to reclaim your dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments, because sometimes, your story might reach someone who needs it more than you can imagine. And if you're drawn to honest, deeply human stories about family, honor, choices, and quiet resilience, don't forget to follow this channel. There are so many more stories I want to share with you, about people who were once overlooked, but rose quietly and changed everything. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.